Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's TSIA Interact session, Building Your Customer Success Flywheel with HPE into Tango. My name is Varja, and I'll be your host today. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. We'll be using Slido today for Q&A during the session, which can be found in the panel to the right of the session player. We encourage your comments and questions. If you think of a question for the presenters at any point, please submit them through the Q&A panel. Our presenters will be answering questions during the entire presentation, so please continue to add in questions to Slido when you have them. We also encourage you to complete the session evaluation. A button will appear above the session player roughly 15 minutes before the session ends. I would now like to introduce our presenters today, Guy, CEO and founder of Tatango, and Carlos, Head of Customer Success at Aruba Networks. We have a lot of exciting content to cover, so let's jump right in and get started. Guy and Carlos, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, Carlos. Good morning. Thanks for joining.
Hey, good morning, Guy. Good morning, everybody else on the session. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so we've got this packed 45 minutes to talk about building your customer success flywheel. And I really wanted to do this with you, Carlos, because you've had this amazing experience starting at a startup, doing this in a big company, which I think a lot of the folks that are listening to us are part of, and going digital first. So we should jump right in and start talking about this. So I'm excited about that. Just before we begin, I want to introduce myself. My name is Guy Nirpaz. I'm the CEO and founder of Tatango. Tatango, we create customer success technology. So check it out if you are interested in it. And Carlos, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Casada. I'm the head of the Customer Success Center of Excellence for Aruba Networks, as well as leading the digital services strategy for the Global Services Organization.
Yeah, and Aruba Networks is part of HPE right now, right? So that's...
Yeah, that's correct. Aruba was acquired by HPE about 5 years ago, so we are also working very closely with building out the customer success program there as well.
Perfect, right? So we have a theme here, building a customer success flywheel. And for those of you who checked the video I've sent ahead of this event, one of the key questions we're trying to understand is how can we help others who have not jumped in already or have not kind of embarked full force ahead customer success, how to do it, right? So the theme of this talk, and feel free to ask any questions during the presentation. We're going to walk through your personal journey. Carlos ask some questions and let us know what we can add for you guys to learn. So let's jump right in. So Carlos, can you talk a little bit about your starting in customer success? How did you even find yourself in customer success, and what was the first customer success project you embarked on?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned before, Guy, my career history has had me go through a number of startups, different sizes throughout my career. Predominantly, I seem to always land in services-related roles, so everything from pre-sales to post-sales. And then for about 8 years, I ran global services for a company named Aruba Networks, which is now Fortinet. And so always been very customer-centric, very customer facing. And I would say a number of years ago, I was actually working at a startup doing big data, machine learning type of roles. And my role was to essentially listen to the customer, figure out how they could, provide them or propose them a solution on how they could leverage a technology, and then work internally to go and develop a solution, and then make sure that the customer was getting value from the solution. This all sounds very familiar now to the audience of customer successes. Back in those days, there wasn't a science or a name attached to it. And so as I continued to develop that role and started learning more about really what it was doing, I came across this concept, or this what I call the science of customer success, and realized that unknowingly I had already started to implement some of these things. And so I would say my first stint of actually doing real customer success was at that startup. And at that time, my role was I was kind of VP of business development and solution, and then eventually I ended up pivoting to formalizing a role as a VP of customer success at that company.
Yeah, and that's actually what you're saying is very interesting because this idea of customer-driven growth and using data to drive customer-driven growth as a business model. I think we all agree it's not a function, right? It's just a company mindset, and then the question is who's doing what. And I think you've got a good story there of how this has evolved over time. But let's kind of fast forward into Aruba Networks and HPE. What was the first? You and I talked about this, that there was a very long incubation period before you guys, jumped on actually doing. So can you talk a little bit more about why did you have to wait and what were the considerations?
Yeah. So that's a good segue. So when I joined Aruba, I didn't join Aruba as the leader of the customer success organization. I actually joined the global services organization in a leadership role, kind of what I call behind the curtains, which is leveraging my background in machine learning and technology to figure out how we could drive self-service and efficiencies. And as I started to evaluate kind of landscape, one of the areas that I found was an opportunity was how the company was approaching the way that we actually delivered services for our SaaS offerings. SaaS offerings were something that were relatively new to the company. And so as I started trying to understand a little bit more of that construct, one of the things that I quickly realized is that we weren't necessarily doing a great job of monitoring or measuring kind of the attachment and also measuring the renewal rates. And as many people on this call know, is you have to understand what your renewal rates are to figure out how all the other things in the phase are working on. So I came into this with, I would say, zero organizational debt, meaning that there wasn't an existing team before. So that was a plus and a negative, right? So there wasn't anybody that had evangelized this concept before, as well as there wasn't any of that pre-work. But at the same time, I wasn't having to change mindset. So very, very early on, what we basically focused on, actually at that point it was just myself, is building up kind of the case for this, which is we've been treating the new SaaS and subscription business a lot like our traditional legacy business or perpetual business. And so it really meant getting our arms around the data, understanding the install base, and some of the things that I think most customer success leaders relate to is really building out what would the segmentation model look like based on the install base, based on our go-to-market. What are the segmentation models? What are the different motions that we have to do? And I would say one of the early findings that we found was that a large percentage of our install base would absolutely fall into what most of us would call as the tech touch segment, because that business was so new that we had a lot of our install base in that realm. And being such a new organization, or it was basically, to your point, an incubation, we didn't necessarily have the funding that we would need to go in and introduce a large number of CSMs to cover that install base.
So, but in the pre-call, you kind of mentioned that I think several months, maybe six months before kind of actually taking the first action. So, and the reason I'm kind of focusing on that, because I know that one of my arguments is that customer success work, customer driven growth works, right? We're all on Zoom right now, so it works, right?
Yeah.
Customer driven growth works. Customer success technology works because companies that use technology to drive the results that they're looking for are more efficient, can change faster, and learn faster. So with all this knowledge, I want to kind of share with the team here, why did you guys wait? And would you recommend companies to wait, or would you jump right in? I mean, what is a must-have before you jump right in? What is the wait, which is in hindsight you might have eliminated?
Yeah, this is actually a very, very good topic, and something that I talk about a lot in our customer success space with a lot of other leaders. Is at the very beginning, right? You're presented with this opportunity to launch this program, and there are so many decisions along the way that need to be made. And I think where we were struggling with, which I'm sure a lot of people could relate, is where do we get started? There's just so much in front of us. How do we get started, right? And so I would, to your point, Guy, we spent about 3 or 4 months with what I call our spinning cycle, right? Which meant, we spent many hours in front of a whiteboard talking about all the great things that we could do, And one of the very familiar themes was, well, what about this? And let's not forget about this. And what are we going to do with this, right? And so we spent all this time trying to brainstorm and collecting all the different things that we could participate in. And what that did is it was very distracting because while we had all these great ideas, we weren't making any forward progress. And so very, I would say after about 3 to 4 months, what we decided is, look, we were struggling to fit this into a waterfall approach. We didn't know what we didn't know, and it was hard for us to predict where we would be in 3 months. And so we decided that we couldn't take a waterfall approach to this, and we decided to go with an agile approach. And so we've actually, many of the folks that I was surrounded with are very familiar with agile. So we decided to take what we call an MVP approach to this, minimal viable product. So we said, all right, look, what can we do in the next 3 months? We have a whiteboard full of stickies. We can't possibly do everything. So what can we do? And so, one of the first things that we did is we actually started what I call the internal roadshow, which was, what is the charter of this organization? What is it we're saying that we want to do? And let's go evangelize it and get sign off from all the key stakeholders, and then let's get started. And so
What
to
was
your
that?
point, I'm
What
sorry?
was that? What was the initial scope?
So what we landed on was, look, we have new customers, we have existing customers that are mid-journey, and we have customers coming up for renewal. We can't possibly help everybody. So what we said was, why not start improving the experience for every new customer coming on board? So what we said was, look, let's go and focus on net new customers and let's focus on onboarding, right?
So,
If we can get that right, go ahead.
no, I'm saying the onboarding success block,
Yes,
starting with
the onboarding success block. And what we did was like, look, let's go and build up the success block and let's go in and test it out. And then let's open the gates a little bit. And then as customers start flowing into the success block, then we'll start working on the next block so we can stay in front of that cohort as they're going through the entire journey. And by the way, now that we've started the success block, every subsequent new customer will be leveraging the new success block. So we actually always stayed kind of one step ahead of the journey of the customers. And then eventually, ended up with the end-to-end success block journey map, which we had the onboarding, adoption, expansion, and renewal.
and so can you talk a little bit more about the organizational buy-in as you went with an agile model? Do you think it helped the organizational buy-in? Do you think it made it more difficult to get the rest of the organizational aligned around this concept?
I think it made it a lot more real. I think it made it a lot more tangible. I would say, again, I can't say this enough, when we pivoted away from the waterfall model and started leveraging what we call the MVP model, which is the agile model, we now could actually demonstrate progress. We could actually demonstrate results, right? And so for us, it's something that we continue to use today. It's a very big core of what we do with our program development. And to your point about the adoption, one of the things that we actually did is we actually self-inflicted ourselves to what we call a monthly business review. I actually call it the CS open mic. So on a monthly basis, we would organize a call and invite all the executives that signed off on the charter, and we'd give them an update on where we were. So, 30 days in, here's what we've done, and here's the results, and here's what's happening for the next 30 days. And till this day, we continue to do that.
That sounds great. So customer success is, get started, narrow it down to a single part of the customer journey, onboarding, adoption, renewal, escalation, and so forth will be
Yeah.
called a single success block, run it and learn from that. So, but what did you learn, right? So what was, so there was I'm thinking about this mindset of a potential listener to our talk who's in the phase which is pre-implementation. They have
Yeah.
all these, we should do this, and what about that, as you described. And then you have the experience of implementing the first part of
Mhm.
the program. What was the learning that, what surprised you?
What surprised me was, I would say, the response not only from the internal stakeholders, but from our customers. So one of the big pieces of our program is a digital first approach. So as I mentioned earlier, we were presented with a situation where we had a pretty significant install base already. And this was kind of a grassroots effort. So it's not like we were supported with a lot of budget to go and make a big impact. But we knew that one of the big things we needed to get it in front of was the proactive renewal notifications. That to me, was one of the big things we needed to make sure that we drove, because that was something that we learned from a campaign we executed with customers that had churned, is that many of them had churned because they hadn't realized they had actually lapsed. So we needed to get in front of that. And so, what I was saying earlier was we actually built out an end-to-end digital journey map. So we took a very digital first approach to this early on. When we take a look at, the way that we structured the org, essentially I was like the first CSM. My first hire was a CS ops manager to help me get my arms around the data and the development and deployment of a CS platform. And then the third was a program manager. And so I kind of call that the iron triangle is how we actually launched this team. And so, with that, we were able to, even till this day, I think the latest numbers show we've onboarded over 7,700 customers. We've reduced churn by about 40%. We have reduced time to value by about 15 days. Our net retention is about 135%. And by the way, we submitted this as an application for a Star Award, and we ended up as a finalist for Innovation Customer Success. If anyone wants to hear more about more detail about how we built this, it's actually published. But what we found is we were able to really move the needle, leveraging the technology and the automation that CS platforms provide, with a team of like 3 CSMs.
So yeah, so I think it's extremely relevant for today's, customer success in COVID days, and a lot of organizations are kind of trying to switch from a people-centered approach to customer success to a digital-centered approach to customer success, and you've been fortunate to start like this. So can you take like a minute to describe the framework of thinking? How do you think about setting up a digital program for managing the customer journey?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mentioned earlier I used to work at a number of companies leveraging machine learning and AI. So, I now approach things always from a technology first perspective. And I knew that I didn't have the luxury of hiring CSMs to start addressing the problem. One of the first things that we did is we actually ordered the product ourselves. We actually worked with a local reseller and purchased the product, with personal email addresses. So we could actually start to audit what is it that customer experience looks like from the outside. We identified some friction points and then came back and said, look, we can actually address this friction points by addressing proactive digital engagements leading up to this friction point and then walking them around that friction point.
Yeah, I just want to kind of focus on this. So I really like this idea of kind of user-centered thinking and starting outside in and looking into that. But if you can spend a little bit more time on why this is unique, right? Why do you think it's not like the common practice that everyone is doing? And what are
Yeah,
some of the key learnings as you kind of adopt this outside in user-centered journey experience?
Yeah, one of the things I would say, guys, one of the things that I'm finding is like this digital first approach for some reason seems unique in the industry. And I think a lot of that has to do because, to the earlier comment, when people get started, they either are going in a situation where they already have human capital, they already have CSMs, they got to figure out how they're going to leverage them, and or the technology piece isn't something that they're either comfortable with or familiar with, or may seem like a black art. And for me, it was kind of motivated by necessity, right? So I didn't have that. I would say from a lessons learned perspective is what we found is we actually started with digital first, which actually helped us drive scalability. And then now we're actually looking at how we introduce human elements into it. So one of the things that we've done, guys, is we've actually introduced that end-to-end digital journey map into all of our tiers of CSM delivery, right? Digital, mid, and high touch engagement. So all of the engagements will have the digital onboarding, the automated welcome letters. The one thing I do want to make sure that I talk about is we've actually personified our digital journey map. So we've actually created a fictitious character which is called Steve, and Steve is the one who actually introduces the customers and walks the customers through that onboarding journey, and kind of helps them along the way. And we've gotten a lot of really good feedback on that. I would say, our open rates and click through rates on a lot of our digital engagement are way above industry standards, and it's something that we continually review. So one of the things I would say that's a little bit different is we actually hired a marketing type person, like a retention marketing person, to be part of our team. And she's the one that tracks all of our digital campaigns that come out of Tatango, for example, and can track, the success of those, whether we need to tweak them, A/B testing, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so we have the first question on the forum. Thank you very much. So the question is about scale, right? So with 3 CSMs only, and I think you didn't say 3 CSM, you basically said 1 CSM, 1 ops person, and 1 kind of a communication person, maybe two more. But the question is kind of more, um, did you segment or did you segment the customer base, or how did you segment the customer? What
Sure.
was your
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Jesus. So um, initially it was myself, the CS ops, and the program manager. Once we launched our digital journey and we'd actually gotten some operational efficiencies, we did hire CSMs. What we ended up doing is because 100. So let me take a step back. For those customers or folks on the call who may know Aruba, we weren't addressing the entire install base. There was a particular product line that we were addressing, and within that product line, yes, we absolutely segmented. And going back to the MVP concept at the very early of the conversation, we knew there's three segments, but we had to focus on one and then work our way up, right? So in the initial round, the initial kickoff, we focused on a digital first. So we built out the digital first. Then we went up as we hired these new CSMs. We said, well, what are the customers that we can add CSMs to, and what is it that the CSMs will do? So again, leveraging technology, leveraging the CS platform, we created a heat map or kind of a grid that gave us an opportunity to understand where the customers were in the journey, what the customer's ACV was, so that kind of helped us put them in the tier one, tier two, and tier three segment. And then what is the current health of the customers? And so I've been hearing during this conference this whole concept of the pooled CSM model. We call it the swarm CSM model. We actually leverage Calendly quite a bit. So in all of our digital engagements, we actually include a link to Calendly. So actually, Steve will actually even instruct you, like if you want to speak to a real CSM, click on the link to schedule. So Calendly allowed us to manage the three resources and understand where they were spending time. And then aside from that, the CSM who would be managing that heat map that I just talked about and identify which customers were starting to go off track so we could engage with them and get them back on track.
so was there like a clear separation between customers that received the digital engagement and the ones that had CSM did not have digital engagement, or was the human in addition to digital engagement? What was the
Yeah, 100%, 100% of our customers are on the digital engagement. It doesn't matter if you're high touch, mid touch, or just purely technical. So 100% of the customers will receive all the proactive notifications, right? With some of the product telemetry, we can tell if the customer is consuming 10, 15, 20% of what they purchased. So we'll send them proactive reminders automatically. That happens across the board. What would happen is, let's take for example a customer who's in the digital engagement, and we actually identify that they're starting to go, off track. So green is on track, yellow is off track, red is at risk. When we identify a customer that goes off track, then we can essentially promote that customer to tier two and introduce a CSM to help them get back into the green. We'll stay with them till they turn green, and we drop them back into the digital engagement.
so that's kind of basically the concept of dynamic assignment, dynamic
Right,
segment. So it's not like a fixed segmentation, it's more situational,
right.
where the value and the potential is just part of the story, and then the availability of your team and the status of the customer is what makes the determination of assigning, for a fixed or limited for a specific work body of work, someone to get them back on track. So something like this, right?
Exactly, exactly. And now that we've done that, we are now expanding the CS capabilities across our services portfolio. So what we've landed on, the high touch CSM model that all of us are aware of, is basically pivoting to be a monetized offer. So to be able to get kind of that dedicated CSM where CSM is managing a portfolio, those customers would have subscribed to that higher level service. And then, for digital, it's best effort. And then for tier two, we do have like dynamic assignment.
Great. So we've got two more questions. I'll read a question from Evan Williams. While building your team, who was responsible for renewals and expansions, CS or sales? Why did you make this decision?
Yeah, very, very good question. This is one I hear a lot. It goes back to what is the charter of your customer success organization, right? So very early on, when we started looking at identifying our charter, the CS community is very willing to share what they're doing, right? So I reached out to a number of CS leaders and understood their model, and then landed on essentially the proposed model for us. What I found during that study was, there's two types of CS organizations. There are CS organizations that report into sales, and those CSMs are quota carrying, right? So their whole focus on expansion and cross sell. And then there's a separate CS organization where it's under services, and they're focused more on value adoption, retention, right, and renewal. Expansion will happen in that other model, but as a secondary function. And so for us, we actually settled on the latter model where we were really focused on, making sure the customer was adopting, getting value, and driving retention. But because the key focus of this group is to really be that trusted advisor for the customer, we wanted to make sure that we separated the role of the CSM from anything that had to do with the transaction. So the best way for me to describe the role of a CSM for renewals in our side is I always go back to the image of those people at the tarmac who are actually got the orange cones and they're bringing in the plane right after the plane has landed. That's the role of the CSM, right? When you look at the end of the year conversation, what's that?
What is a plane? Can you remind me, please?
What is the plane? The plane is the customer.
What is a plane? I've never
A
seen a
plane.
plane from 200,000 miles last year to like zero this year. I don't remember what a plane is.
Yeah, it's those things collecting dust right now. No, but to that point, right? When you look at what the CSM's role in the renewal is, just to close out the question is, we basically do the end of year conversation with the customer. We say, look, here's the value that you received. Here's the number of support tickets that we're able to address within the time. Here's the adoption that you've had with the product. And by the way, other customers like you, based on your growth, here's how you compare to other customers. Here's what the renewal looks like. Hopefully you had a good experience. Let me introduce you to somebody who can, either hand you over to your partner or get you a quote. So the transaction, the quoting will happen outside of my team, but a lot of the customer intelligence that's collected during that term is actually collected by the CSM. It's kind of rolled up as a book of business and handed over for the other group to transact.
Great. We've got some more questions, but I would just share observation. So it seems to me, Carlos, that it was worth it to start running this agile program and start experimenting and relying on digital and technology that enables digital, because it seems that you've learned a lot, both personally and as an organization, while actually doing. So learning by doing versus learning everything up front and then trying to implement all of that. Is this like a fair statement? I mean, would you agree with my point of view here?
Absolutely. I think not only myself personally, but I think the company's learned a lot. And when you take a look at even the history of this team, right? It started with three people. We started, being known as the small customer success team because there was other groups in the organization who were doing more of high level account management, who were passing themselves off as customer success. And so there was always this point of contention. Well, how do you compare to them? And because of the build out of the capability and the framework that we have and the performance and value that we've driven, we've actually pivoted from being just this customer success organization to really solidifying our presence as a center of excellence in customer success. And so what that's actually helped us accomplish is to be kind of the authority on CS. So we can have pockets of CSM throughout the company, but what the COC brings is that consistent one platform, one framework. We help drive and define the journey maps. The CSMs can either be part of our delivery team or they can be part of the ad services program delivery team, but they're all aligned on the same COE concepts, right? So definitely quite a bit of evolution on our side.
Great. So we've got a lot of questions coming. Please keep them going. And so the next one is from Guillaume, which is, could you elaborate, please? How do you define customer at risk? How do you track it? How do you collect it? And what do you do about this?
Yeah,
I'm
so
understanding the question a little bit, but
yeah, exactly. So Guy, I want to make sure that we consider the topic of this conversation, right? Because you opened up with saying, look, how do you get started? How can we help other CS leaders out there kind of break that monotony of just brainstorming and actually start executing, right? One of the things I would say is don't boil the ocean, right? You will continually get new data sources, you will learn from your initial design, and you will improve it and tweak it, right? So for example, the way that we did segmentation when we got started has changed at least 4 times since then. So you don't have to worry about getting it right. I think the quicker you can develop something and get feedback from that and understand whether it's working or not is probably the best thing you could do. So in the early phases, right, if you think about it, we hadn't really convinced the product management team of the value of what we're doing. So they weren't looking at necessarily building any new capabilities for telemetry for us to give us better insight. So we had to do with what we knew we had, right? And so at the time, what we knew we had was we had understood historically how long it was taking customers to go in and drive the existing onboarding process, right? We knew at the time that it was taking customers on average 40 days to complete, very basic onboarding. So obviously, any customer that's at the 30-day mark and isn't close to that, we could leverage that. So we leveraged a lot of time-bound logic there. The other thing that we took a look at is, what information do we have? Is this customer currently opening a lot of support tickets? Well, that could always be a sign of adoption. But have those tickets been open for a long time? Are they priority one tickets, right? Those are opportunities to understand what the health is, right? So there's a number of different attributes. So very early on, we started very, very rudimentary on how to calculate health. Obviously any customer who hadn't completed onboarding in 40 days would go to red. We want to make sure, because what we'd found was customers that didn't finish onboarding in the first 40 days would probably never actually adopt the solution, and when renewal came, it would just automatically go into the churn bucket. So that was kind of our first kind of V1 of health, is to address that. Nowadays, we probably have about 10 different data sources that we ingest into the Tango to really give us a more granular view on health, and we drive playbooks off of all that.
All right. So our topic. So this is all great, and we can see the engagement in the chat. I mean, you're doing fantastic job as a leader. I'm so happy we're having this conversation. I want to talk about. So we talked about igniting the customer success program. How does it turn to a flywheel? How does it kind of start creating momentum that as you go along? You mentioned some of it with the internal buying and early success and sharing information, but from our previous conversation, I know that you guys are going broader and deeper and generating more momentum. So can you talk a little bit about this dynamic, right? So once you've ignited the program, how do you turn it into a flywheel?
I would say one of the things that we did early on is TSIA has this great slide that talks about the CS capabilities framework, right? I believe there's like 6 sections on there. Like 1.1 is, I believe, charter and strategy, and there's a bunch of components there. What we've done continually throughout our progression is we've done kind of our own maturity assessment against those capabilities. And so as you start figuring out what are the next areas you need to develop, we would really lean on that capability framework to figure out, well, what are areas that we've already completed and what are the gaps? And so I think we've taken that kind of as a North Star. The goal is obviously to fill out that capability map. One of the things that we've also done, I would say, as part of our program development is we actually created this concept of an incubation. And so I actually, now that we have more folks on the team, I actually have a dedicated program manager and 1 or 2 CSMs who are working on the next incubation. And so as an example, right now we're actually running a pilot for how we're going to do a partner success program. How are we going to go and enable partners to drive these success blocks and these playbooks that we've developed internally? And so how we do that is we allow the existing CSMs to continue to drive their day-to-day operations, but we have this other kind of incubator who's creating this new capability, working with the cohort that's been identified, and running through a cycle. And then based on lessons learned, then they take that, document it, operationalize it, and then train it back into it, and then it gets adopted, and then we go in and incubate the next one. So it's allowed us to kind of create this parallel workforce where we can go in and continue day-to-day ops and not disrupt that, while continuing to iterate and develop new capabilities into the program.
So clearly the concept of agility of the optimizing on the speed of learning versus optimizing on initial completion is paying dividends for you, because you learn faster. Mm-hmm. And you capture these learnings, you implement those learnings, and I'm assuming that the learning is not a single cycle, there are multiple cycles until you figure out that you have enough learning that it's mature enough where you can launch it at a broader scale, and the launches keep on growing, as you mentioned, one product, multiple products, one cohort of one segment of customers, multiple segments of customers, and so forth.
And that's where the agile approach is, I think, super beneficial, because for those of you who understand agile, there's this concept of backlog. And many of us have been in conversations where you're whiteboarding about what you're going to go and develop. And while you're whiteboarding, another thought pops up or another idea comes up that's a very, very good idea, but could be very distracting in accomplishing what you're setting out to do right now. And so this allows for that, right? So it's, my team is very familiar with like, hey, let's add that to the backlog. Let's add it to the backlog. And in the agile, the backlog isn't like a black hole where things go to die, right? The backlog is the I would say kind of like the menu that you go and review about what is it you're going to focus on in the next release. And so the entire team participates in that backlog review exercise as we determine what are the areas we're going to focus on in the next 3 months. So what that's actually done is it's made it really, really comfortable for the team to put things in the backlog and be comfortable that it is going to get the attention and that will eventually get done, right? And so for us, like I said, pivoting from the waterfall to an agile has been very, very beneficial and has helped us really, to your point on the flywheel model, right? It is a very useful development model.
And I'm assuming with a self-promoting plug for Tatango that being able to take things from the backlog and implementing them quickly is a huge value, because if backlog to reality would take you months, that's the backlog loses its confidence, and that is actually going to come in at some point soon.
That's a good point. One of the things that I will tell you from other colleagues that I've spoken with who are also implementing solutions is don't expect the vendor to come in and journey map for you. I think that the vendor has a tool that is set up to ingest what your journey map looks like and what your success blocks look like, but the subject matter expert on that is you. And so one of the things I think has been super helpful for us to quickly adopt Tatango and leverage it is we've already pre-identified what it is we're trying to do from a customer engagement perspective. We built out the different phases and the journey maps and the playbooks. And so implementing those and defining how we trigger them has been obviously accelerated and helped drive a lot of the automation. And there's a lot of good subject matter expertise and best practices from the tool vendors like Tatango, but you do want to come to the table with at least a general direction of what you're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, you may end up falling short and not being able to really use the full value of the tool.
Great. So another question around, I think it's kind of one of those early change management questions from Leon. How do you gain the trust of your sales organization through the inception and evolution of the customer success organization? In other words, I've seen this question coming many times. Some cases, CS is kind of sounds like competing to sales, or who owns the customer. So Carlos, who owns the customer?
We all do. No, so that's a very good point. One of the things that I did early on is I did this road show, right? And the road show was here's the charter of the team, and I identified who were the folks that I knew were either going to be potential roadblocks for me or allies. And during that conversation, I basically collected their feedback on the charter and had them contribute to the charter. So when the charter was done, they basically had signed off that yes, this is something that I can support. So sales was absolutely part of that. So I think that's step one. Step two is in the early stages, you want to make sure that sales does not see you as a competitor or they're going to be stepping on their toes. So one of the first things that we did is when we created our segmentation pyramid, any customer that we felt was a top tier customer, we knew they already had account managers that were meeting with the account every month. And we weren't going to add a lot of value to those conversations. We also didn't have a big enough team to step on there. So instead what we did is we're like, look, we actually have a lot of data about that customer you're going to meet next month. We should connect so we could share that data with you so you have a better idea of what you're walking into, and we can be on the call as a fly on the wall, but you still own the customer. We're here to support you, right? So that was kind of one of the things that we did is we actually became more of a supporting role for the higher account managers, if you will. And then secondly is, what is it that a sales guy wants? What does a salesperson want? They want, leads that are hot leads that are, going to convert. So how does that happen? As a CSM, as you're engaging with an account and you identify an opportunity and you're handing it to the salesperson, and they're going to tell all their friends, like, look, these guys are actually handing me hot leads, they're converting. That's two. That's one. The second thing is what a sales guy wants. They want reference customers. Well, who can give you reference customers? The CSMs can. So if you can go in and hand a salesperson a customer who is adopting the product and is happy with it, then they're going to start seeing value. And the third, right, is working with the marketing team and converting those customer references into case studies that the salespeople can then leverage to sell the next deal. So that's what we really focused on in the Inception, is really being a supporting tool for the sales team. And we're on this 3-year journey, right? So in the next 3 years, we are going to go from kind of what it's like layer, I forget, layer, introduction to layer, to like layer efficient. So our goal in the next 3 years is we are actually slowly educating the sales team about the go-to-market strategy and the integration of CS. So in 3 years, we will have that separation of roles. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're in the go-to-market discussions. They know we're coming. Right now, we're playing a supportive role, but we will be playing a more definitive role, as the book says, as farmers versus hunters, and that delineation is being built now.
What book are you referring to?
It's a great book, Farm Don't Hunt. Changes lives.
All right, this is a great conversation. Thanks, Carlos. We've got time for one more question. So I think I'm gonna ask you this question, although we got some more questions in the panel. My question is, the top 3 advices you would give to the Carlos, before he started. What would those be?
I would say the first one, and I've said this a couple of times, right? Try not to boil the ocean. There's just so much stuff to be done here that it'll prevent you from getting started if you try to address everything up front. So I think that was huge. I would say the second piece is spend time building those strategic relationships internally within the company. I would say some of my biggest allies within the company now is the marketing team, right? We've been working, especially because of our digital first approach, a lot of the proactive email communication, right? The last thing you want to do is run marketing the wrong way, and then they throw communications governance at you and saying you can't do this, right? So for me, networking internally has been huge. And the third is, never stop listening to what everybody else is doing. This is a very close CS community. I feel very fortunate to be surrounded by many, many CS leaders who are more than willing to kind of open up the kimono and talk about what they're doing, what lessons learned are, and reciprocate, right? I spend, quite a bit of time talking to other CS leaders who are interested in what we're doing. And so you learn a lot of what to do, what not to do, things like that. So I would say, those are the 3 things that, don't assume. Customer success is, I would say, in its kind of, I would say, juvenile years, maybe teenage years. So don't assume that people have figured all these things out already. I think the industry as a whole is still learning a lot. As more and more companies start pivoting to SaaS, we're coming up with a bunch of different new models, especially in our case, right? CS is pretty well structured and I think mature when you're a software company. But when you're doing software and hardware and you're dealing with, distributors and partners in the middle, that's pretty greenfield. So I think we're also trying to figure out what that model will look like. And so always excited to hear what other people are doing and also what I could bring to the table as well.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. I think we're right at time. I must say that you sound very kind of fast-moving startup mindset for an enterprise business. So I mean that as a compliment. Being able to move that fast as an enterprise organization. A lot of pearls of wisdom in this conversation. This has been great. What's the best way for people to find you out, hook up with you on LinkedIn, email?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. So if there's any follow-up questions or if you guys want to talk more about what we've done or share what you've done, I'd love to hear. You can connect me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and guys, the same with me. Look me up at LinkedIn, Guy Near Puz, Tango. And thanks very much for spending the time, Carlos. Thanks again. This was really exciting talking to you, and your passion comes across very, very authentically. So thank you.
Yeah, Guy, the last question on the chat is what is the name of the book that I referenced? And the name of the book is called Farm Don't Hunt.
Yeah, the reason we didn't put a plug is because I wrote it, so we didn't want to kind of push too hard. But Carlos is my #1 bookseller. We have the numbers to demonstrate that.
Yes.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. We hope to get in touch with you soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you, Guy and Carlos. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Take care, everyone.